Direct Connection is made by MPT to serve all of our diverse communities and is made possible by the generous support of our members. Thank you. Live from Maryland Public Television, this is Direct Connection with Jeff Salkin.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in for Direct Connection. Baltimore's mayor plans to have a new police commissioner on the job in the next few weeks. That person will be the fourth leader of the troubled department this year. Joining us tonight to answer your questions about safety in the city is the person who began the year as Commissioner Kevin Davis. Sir, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Jeff, for having me.
Again, welcome back.
Yeah, it's always a peaceful ride out here, and to see the trees and the long driveway, and I'm honored to be back here with you.
We're glad you enjoyed the drive. You're consulting now. If you were to consult for whoever is named as the new commissioner, what would you tell him or her about making the department work?
I've given that a lot of thought, and I'm hopeful that the next police commissioner reaches out to me so I can help him or her. And with the great benefit of hindsight, I would recommend to Baltimore's next police commissioner to bring in as large of a team as possible of outsiders to occupy the executive command staff ranks of the BPD. That outside perspective from police departments and jurisdictions that have turned the corner and are getting the community and the crime fight right is a perspective that's needed in the city. And this is no indictment against any of the current homegrown BPD commanders, but they've been raised in a culture that's dysfunctional and a culture that's been neglected by far too many mayoral administrations. And an outside perspective, not just the police commissioner's outside perspective, but a team of subject matter experts needs to come in and help this police department.
The commissioner needs to be an outsider too?
I think at this point in time, Jeff, the next Baltimore police commissioner must be an outsider.
Let's talk about where this department stands. I mean, the city seemed to have been doing better, at least when measured by the homicide rate. The last month, we've had over 40 homicides. We've had the gun trace task force scandal, 8 officers going to jail for corruption, still dealing with the aftermath of the death of Freddie Gray 3 years ago, the department operating under a consent decree supervised by a federal judge and a system that we can talk about a little bit. What's your view? Where would you start? What's the biggest challenge?
Well, all of those things you mentioned are very real, but the elephant in the middle of the BPD's living room is a woefully understaffed police department. I ended my almost 3 years in Baltimore with 500 fewer police officers than Fred Bielefeld had in 2012. So the BPD has been intentionally downsized over the years. And if you go right down the road to Washington, D.C., and I spend a lot of time now in D.C., they're a police department with 1,300 more police officers and 1/3 of the violent crime of Baltimore. So we have to invest in police officers because it is really hurting the rank and file. It's hurting the capacity to have reduced caseloads, or the capacity to have more people involved in training, more internal affairs detectives. When you're 1,500 cops short, and that's my estimation, every aspect within the policing profession suffers.
Was it intentionally downsized, or was it a matter of people just not wanting to apply for those jobs?
Well, in 2015, Jeff, as we all remember, when the riots and the unrest hit, we had a lot of police officers resign from the Baltimore Police Department, and there's no doubt about that. By the time we hit 2017, we broke even with attrition, which means we were hiring as many police officers as we were losing to retirement and resignation. I think there's great interest in serving the BPD, but there needs to be a political commitment that we're going to do everything we can to make the Baltimore Police Department the highest paid police department in the state, the best equipped police department in the state, the best trained police department in the state, and BPD, in spite of being the biggest and the busiest police department in the state of Maryland, lags behind in each and every one of those categories.
Let me remind our viewers, if you have a question for the former commissioner, about the future of policing in the city and elsewhere. Give us a call. We'll have the number up on the screen. You can also email your questions. The email address is livequestions@mpt.org. How much of that requires state help? If you want to pay people more, the city budget isn't going to support it.
You know, Jeff, a lot of folks, particularly some on the city council, they will point their finger at Governor Hogan and the state for not doing enough to help Baltimore. My experience is quite the opposite. Governor Hogan and his people have bent over backwards to help me during my tenure to get the police department to a better place. If not for Governor Hogan, we wouldn't have been able to introduce mobile data computers to our police cars. And to put mobile data computers in perspective, I got my first mobile data computer in my police car in Prince George's County in 1998. So thanks to the governor and his Office of Crime Control and Prevention, we were able to do that. But there has to be a commitment from the city. Everybody jumps up and down when we spend $40 million in overtime money. But that $40 million in overtime money pales in comparison to the necessary financial commitment that the political leadership of the city needs to make. So we have the number of sworn police officers that we need to keep this city safe. If we have the adequate number of cops, we won't need to spend that amount of overtime money, and we'll be able to get some cops some much needed rest.
But if you were a young man considering policing again, and you started in Prince George's or Anne Arundel?
Started in Prince George's.
Prince George's.
Yeah.
So say somebody is considering, do I go to work in Prince George's County or Baltimore City? I imagine the pay is comparable, but the degree of difficulty would figure to be a lot higher in Baltimore, maybe the risk also.
Well, Baltimore stands alone when it comes to the dangers of policing in the state. And I think from that, Baltimore needs to be the best paid. I think we're the fourth best paid police department in the state right now. Howard, Montgomery, and Prince George's have starting pay higher than the city of Baltimore. Policing is still the best profession in the world. I miss it. I have no regrets. Enjoyed every moment in Baltimore and Anne Arundel and Prince George's, but we have to pay our police officers in a manner that's consistent with our expectations of them. There's so much we can do with housing incentives. If you're a young cop between the police academy and year 5, the city should move mountains to ensure that those young police officers move into the city, experience city life so they can become part of this community and part of this culture. And with organizations like the Greater Baltimore Committee and others, we can get that done. We need sophisticated leadership to turn the corner.
Let's take some phone calls. Baltimore County, this is Anthony. Anthony, thanks for the call. Go ahead.
First off, you can always be my commissioner. I am a former Baltimore City resident. I've seen the work that you've done for Baltimore City, and in my end, it was greatly appreciated. So it's hats off to you. You did a remarkable job. By far, one of the best commissioners Baltimore City has ever had. Bittersweet seeing you go, but I'm glad to see that you are still in the runnings, if you will. You're a great man, and I just want to tell you, if no one has ever told you, I just want to tell you thank you for the job that you've done for Baltimore City, and I know that you still have Baltimore City in your heart. So,
Anthony,
hats off to you.
Thank you for the phone call.
Jeff, that's nice to hear. And the reason why I'm still involved and invested and committed is because I know that this city can absolutely turn the corner. It's not an impossible task. If you look at DC, if you look at New York, if you look at Los Angeles, those are jurisdictions that not too long ago had violence and corruption and dysfunctional organizations, and now look where they are. Baltimore absolutely can get there.
The list of police commissioners in the city, back to Pomerleau, who may have been the last one to have a really long run, it's a long list. Average tenure is just a couple of years. Whoever gets hired for this job is going to need more than 18 months, right?
Right. I lasted longer than 4 out of my last 5 predecessors at just under 3 years. And if you look at places, and again, I'll use DC and LA and New York as examples, their police commissioners and police chiefs stay in place for 8, 9, 10 years. Ray Kelly was NYPD police commissioner for 12 years, through the ups and through the downs. And the two entities that suffer the most, thanks to inconsistent leadership, is the rank and file cops. They don't know what the game plan is, what the strategy is, what the philosophy is, and then the community and the citizens. They need consistency in leadership as well. But I think all too often in Baltimore, it's been politically convenient, and this isn't self-serving because I'm not the only one who has been, figuratively beheaded, but it's all too convenient to identify all of the woes associated with the public safety fight in Baltimore, put them on the shoulders of a police commissioner, and then when the going gets tough, to bring in someone new. And I think Baltimoreans are smarter than that.
Back to the phones, Baltimore City. This is Barry. Barry, thank you for the call. Go ahead.
Yes, I think personally that we're not dealing with the cause of all the crime in the city. What I think is we're just dealing with the symptoms. We're putting cameras up. We're putting airplanes to take pictures. We're putting police on foot patrol. And what I think, if you look at Baltimore City years ago, we had more sense of family values. Families raised their children. And you don't have to be strict to raise your child, but you have to raise your child. The kids come to school whenever they want, walk into the classroom, they spit in the school teachers' faces, they get up and walk out whenever they want out of the classroom, and it's all in all the neighborhoods. You look at the neighborhoods years ago, we had nice, decent neighborhoods. Now look at some of the neighborhoods boarded up.
Barry,
and I feel that it's because mommy and daddy are not raising children.
Barry,
now,
got it. Thank you very much for the phone call, sir. The point is, it's not just cops and robbers, it's society.
Barry's right. We deal with the symptoms, but the root causes, poverty, health, education, drug addictions, mental illness, all those things are very real in Baltimore. And every societal ill seems to exist in our city's 78 square miles. And I'll give the current mayor a lot of credit, because she meets with her city agency heads every morning, and she compels them to come up with innovative ideas to help the crime fight in non-traditional ways. So whether it's abandoned homes or dirty alleys or other neglected entities in society, there's a mindset shift going on. We haven't yet realized the results of that mindset shift, but I'm confident that mindset is something that's shared by more people than not.
In the wake of the death of Freddie Gray, the city police department is operating now under a federal court's consent decree. Civilians, frankly, don't understand what this means. You were involved in it, though, before you came to the city police department, when you ran Prince George's County, right?
Right.
How does it work? Because the current U.S. Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, is not a fan of these. I think his idea is that it handcuffs the police department. Yeah. How do you see it?
Unfortunately, the current Attorney General is wrong. I lived through a consent decree experience in Prince George's County, and like Baltimore, there was a Department of Justice patterns or practice investigation that revealed unconstitutional policing practices over many, many years, just like Baltimore. And thanks to that federal oversight, and it was painful, and a lot of people didn't understand it, a lot of people resisted it, but it made the Prince George's County Police Department better with the crime fight and better with the community. Too many people in the city right now, and I'll include police officers in this, think that you have to choose one door or the other, the crime fight door or the community engagement door. There are still a lot of folks who don't think that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. So what a consent decree brings is a mandated, compelled reform expectation monitored by a federal judge. It will ultimately make the BPD better with the crime fight, better with the community. We're going through some growing pains right now. There's no doubt about it. And I think the federal judge who oversees it is frustrated with the turnover in leadership at the top. That will hopefully settle very soon. But Baltimore is going to be under a consent decree for several years to come.
How does that affect the cop on the beat?
Well,
His or her job, is it more paperwork? Is it less ability to be proactive? Or is it, needed oversight?
some detractors will say that it's more paperwork and it's less ability to be proactive. But I'll say this, and I'll say this based on my own personal experiences. We have to police our neighborhoods constitutionally. So when we have reasonable suspicion or probable cause to approach someone, to arrest someone, to detain someone, to use force against someone, then the community expects us to do those things. But what happened in Baltimore for all too long, thanks to an adopted zero tolerance policing approach, is that this organization, our nation's 8th largest police department, got away from some of the fundamental traditions of the profession, establishing reasonable suspicion, probable cause, being able to articulate that. We had at least half of our cases over the years the Department of Justice investigation covered not even seeing the light of day in a courtroom because they lacked legal sufficiency. So over time, and again, I tell young cops this over time, you're going to get better equipment, you're going to get better training, you're going to get more training, you're going to have better policies that protect you and the community at the same time. And come see me in 5 years and tell me whether or not the consent decree made us better.
Is it right to think of it as sort of the opposite of stop and frisk, zero tolerance policing? The New York City, the former mayor, defends stop and frisk as something that, in his view, turned around crime there.
If you read a letter today written by Jimmy O'Neill, who's the current NYPD police commissioner, he wrote a letter as a result of President Trump's remarks at the International Association of Chiefs of Police conference in Orlando last week. Stop and frisk is not the main reason for the reduction of crime in New York. It is one of but many reasons. And the stop and frisk, stop, question, and frisk is a tool that should be in our tool bag. But over time, some cities, some jurisdictions have overly relied on it. And then when they've engaged in stop, question, and frisk tactics at the expense of all of the other past proven reliable policing practices, that's when you get disproportionate policing in poor communities, disproportionate policing in African American communities, and then the gap between communities of color in particular and the cops widens and widens, and then you have Freddie Gray in 2015.
Let's take a phone call. Allegheny County, this is Lisa. Thank you for the call. Go ahead.
Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
My question really has to do with training of police officers or engaging people who want to be police officers from out of state. My understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong, they have to go through cadet training, and if they have 5, 10, 20 years experience, it's irrelevant. They still have to start at the bottom of the pile, so to speak.
Thanks for the question.
Well, Lisa, I'll say that you're in the right church, wrong pew. It's called comparative compliance training. So if you're a police officer in another state in America, you can get an abbreviated training in Maryland. So this isn't a Baltimore thing. This is a Maryland police standards and training requirement. So you will not spend the typical, I guess, Jeff, it's about 7-8 months now that new police officers spend in the police academies. Under comparative compliance, you can probably graduate within 1 to 3 months.
Back to the phones, Baltimore County. This is Lewis. Lewis, thank you for calling. Go ahead.
Thank you for accepting my call.
Sure.
My question to the commissioner is, well, with higher pay raises, but there is a short staff to the police department in Baltimore City, and there has been a wide abuse allegations of, there have been allegations of abuse, for, going into red line districts, committing abuse, and repeal of consent decrees. Is the police training actually adequate enough to deal with ethnic relations?
Lewis, thank you for the phone call. Not sure I caught all of that. What did you take away?
So Lewis, if I'm hearing you right, we were not doing enough with cultural sensitivity training in Baltimore. I introduced a history of Baltimore training that was really cultural sensitivity training. This city is a microcosm of America. So we did something very thoughtful, and we introduced young police officers, veteran police officers, to the cultures that make our city great. We think that that was helpful. I'm sure there's some additional enhanced training going on right now, but before you train a police officer to conduct his or her job in a professional manner, a fair manner, an unbiased manner, our entire profession has to do better at selecting police officers. And that's something I know the BPD is working very hard at. It's something that the 18,000 police departments across our country are struggling with.
Email question on that subject, and boil it down to whether police officers, there ought to be a mandate that they live in the community that they serve, or at least the city of Baltimore, if you're going to be a city of Baltimore police officer. Most don't, right?
No, in Maryland, that's illegal. So the only person compelled to live in the jurisdiction is the police commissioner. So certainly laws can be changed. I think the better way to do that would be to offer residency incentives. And that's why I mentioned earlier, if the Greater Baltimore Committee and the mayor's office and our business community got together and said, hey, how can we capture the hearts, minds, and souls of these 20-some-year-old cops who are commuting to the city every day from Pennsylvania and from Carroll County and Baltimore County and Anne Arundel County and the Eastern Shore? How can we capture their hearts, minds, and souls? I think that's a better approach than compelling it to happen.
Well, the state government has a pretty big surplus at the moment, and I don't know if that's been proposed as a potential use for some of it. You know, the Baltimore Sheriff's Office is talking about doing its own patrols in the city. I don't know how helpful that is in terms of your thoughts on that, but broadly, other agencies' involvement. It's been talked about that the state police could take over some of the responsibilities. On a broad level, helpful?
Well, I'm probably going to sound a little pessimistic. All those things are nice, and they're thoughtful, and they're gestures. But again, our elephant in the middle of our room is we need 1,500 more Baltimore City police officers. And the sheriff helping out when they can is great. Having more cadets, having more explorers, convincing the Maryland State Police to patrol I-83, all those things are nice. But that's not going to reduce the number of hours that Baltimore patrol officers are compelled every day to stay beyond their 10-hour tour duty. That's not going to reduce the caseload of homicide detectives and robbery detectives and sex offense detectives and internal affairs detectives. So it's nice to talk about those things, but if we only talk about those things, they're distracting to the main issue, and we need more cops in Baltimore.
Related question, how do you think about the idea that Johns Hopkins University, huge employer, economic engine of the city, wants to have its own police force, not security guards, sworn police officers?
Absolute no-brainer, Jeff. I thought that it would have passed with flying colors last legislative session. I believe that it will this upcoming legislative session. But for the city's #1 employer and the state's #2 employer to say, hey, we want to pay for our own police department, we want to get certified, we want to get accredited, we want to train our police officers, it ultimately is a force multiplier. It lightens the load on the BPD so we can spend more time in the surrounding communities. So it's a no-brainer. And I said this earlier, and I don't mean this tongue-in-cheek. I think what Johns Hopkins failed to do was kiss certain political rings and genuflect at the altar of established politicos before they attempted to get their own police department. I think that they're going about it thoughtfully this time around, not that they didn't previously, but I think it'll pass.
A little bit more legwork. Back to the phones, Baltimore City, this is Holly. Holly, thank you for calling. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
You are so good. So many of us miss you desperately. I have to say, my question, teaching in a West Baltimore school, is, in fact, I know that Major Gibson, who you promoted, you and I talked about how wonderful he is, used to go and play with the children in, where I'm in the Northern District, so I think it was, it was in the elementary school over on the east side. And I teach down in West Baltimore. The cops don't need lollipops. If they could just bring a ball. Why don't more cops come into school, like the one I teach in West Baltimore, the elementary school, with a ball, a basketball, a football, a baseball, doesn't matter.
Holly,
And
thank
play
you
with the
very
kids.
much. Yeah, great phone call. Thank you very much.
So,
There's
you
a
know,
lot of that.
Yeah, Jeff.
Police
what,
athletic leagues.
What Holly's describing is community policing, and cops in Baltimore do that every day. They're challenged by their competing priorities of being understaffed. There's a four-letter word called drafting in the BPD, and that means that after you work your 10-hour tour of duty, you have to stay an additional 4, 6, 8 hours if we don't have enough police officers to fill the next shift. So that creates a lot of fatigue, a lot of anxiety. I share your thoughts, Holly, about Major Gibson. Major Gibson is now officially the most popular police employee in Baltimore now that T.J. Smith is gone. I think they were right up there at 1 and 2 for so many years. But Rich Gibson is the embodiment of all the things that every community wants to see in police leadership.
I just have 5 seconds. Were you serious that your friend T.J. Smith, the former spokesman, ought to run for mayor?
Absolutely serious. And I'm not the only one saying it. I guess I was the first one to say it aloud. He has all the leadership traits necessary.
Kevin Davis, former commissioner, now consultant. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you very much. That's our program for this week. We're back Thursday with Your Money and Business and Friday for State Circle. For all of us at MPT, thanks for watching and have a good night.
This program was made by MPT to serve all of our diverse communities.